in our series of webinars from the Executive Education branch of Bangor Business School. As you may know already, we have two globally unique programs, of which a little bit later at the end, in case some of you have not yet studied those. Others of you I recognise as current students and some as our alumni. These two programs are, as I say, globally unique. One is the Chartered Banker MBA, the only program in the world to have an MBA from a traditional university and also a parallel professional qualification status of Chartered Banker from our partners, the Chartered Banker Institute in Edinburgh, and our more recent development, the MBA in Financial Crime and Compliance. And you'll see that today's webcast is Meet the Financial Intelligence Specialist. That's not me, that's Stephen, who you may be able to see in in my screen is in the top left-hand corner. And the MBA Financial Crime and Compliance also has a parallel award. It's the Financial Intelligence Specialist from our partners, Manchester CF in Canada. Again, globally unique. I should say hello from myself. I'm Stephen Jones, and again, I want to welcome you to our Executive Education webinar series. I'm the Director of Executive Education. I'm in conversation today with another Stephen, and we both spell our name the correct way, with the PH, not with the V. Nevertheless, he's from AML Intelligence in Dublin, and in a moment I'll ask him to say a little bit about himself. But I just want to talk about the title we've chosen. We've chosen to talk about the issue of tackling crime and having procedures against money laundering, anti-money laundering. Is it best handled by individual countries or countries guided by supranational bodies? One of the most obvious would be the US Treasury or the Financial Action Task Force across many countries. And the one that we're particularly focusing on today is the European Union's Anti-Money Laundering Authority, which is now going through the process of working out where to have its headquarters within the European Union. And one of the possible locations is Dublin in Ireland, where Stephen's from. I'm speaking to you from Southeast Asia at the moment, and it's a matter of public record that there are various stakeholders around the world who have been concerned about the detection and the prosecution of financial crime by various national authorities. I won't go into any details. You probably know them yourselves or can find them. These concerned stakeholders include politicians, the financial services providers in the industry, broader society as a whole, but also regulatory authorities elsewhere in the world. And therefore, there's an urgency to us understanding this dimension. Can it be left to an individual nation, its own jurisdiction, to carry out these things? Or is there benefit in sharing these ideas, information, best practice? We may conclude that perhaps there is always a need for sharing best practice, but that's later for when we come towards the end of our time. The format, if you haven't been to one of these before, it's a conversation between the two Stephens. And Stephen will say something, I'll pose a question, we'll feed backwards and forwards. We do have some topics to talk about. We encourage you to ask questions, seek clarification. One of the simplest ways to do that as we proceed will be in the chat area, so just type it in there. I'll pick them up as we go along. And at the end, after about half an hour, 35 minutes or so, then there'll be opportunities for further Q&As, some of which I'll pose from the chat and others which you may unmute your microphone and ask Stephen live. That's quite enough from me at this stage. Welcome, Stephen Rae. Here he is. You can see him there. The photo looks, not unlike him. There we go. Off we go, Stephen. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about AML Intelligence, please.
Hi, Stephen. So greetings from Dublin to Malaysia. And I'm glad to see you look quite alert, because I know it's quite late at night where you are. So yeah, my name is Stephen Rae. I'm the publisher of AML Intelligence, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, anti-financial crime and financial crime compliance regulatory intelligence journals in the world. So I'm Irish. I'm from County Kerry in Ireland. It's on Ireland's southwest coast on the North Atlantic. It's so west. It's the most westerly part of Europe. So westerly, in fact, that many fishermen used to say back in the day that on a clear day you could see Boston. So that's the part of Ireland I'm from. So my family has a small hotel on the west coast of Ireland. So we're used to American, North American, European visitors from all over Europe and the UK coming to County Kerry. So I suppose that's where I got my international outlook from, is meeting international tourists coming to Ireland. I'm a journalist by profession. I started out as a crime journalist, covering the crime beat in Dublin and Ireland. Back in 1996, my colleague Veronica Gearan was murdered by gangland criminals in Dublin, and of course that was a seismic moment for Ireland, a watershed moment in many ways, and it led Ireland to form the Criminal Assets Bureau, which was one of the first asset bureaus set up in the world. And instead of using the criminal burden of proof to seize assets, it used the civil burden of proof. So, as you know, two very different burdens of proof. Criminal burden is beyond reasonable doubt, and the civil proof is far less burdensome. It's on the balance of probabilities. So the Criminal Assets Bureau in Ireland uses the balance of probabilities to seize assets, and that has been a game changer for many assets bureaus around the world. So I progressed from being a crime journalist to being a news editor and subsequently editor. So I was editor of 2 national newspapers in Ireland. Then I became editor-in-chief of the newspaper group, Independent News and Media, which is the biggest media group in Ireland. So I oversaw 4 national newspapers and the biggest online site in Ireland. In 2018 then, I caught the startup bug because we'd set up an innovation hub within INM, which seeded startup companies. So I got the bug and left and have set up a few online companies, including AML Intelligence, which is probably my favorite child. And we, of course, my involvement in financial crime, in covering crime, and then that nexus of business, banking, fintech, regulation, compliance, and crime per se. That's what AML Intelligence is all about. I served on the European Commission's high-level expert group on online disinformation, which of course is hugely important now that online disinformation is going to be a huge problem in politics worldwide, as you know, more than half the world's populations enter election mode over the next 18 months or so. So online disinformation or misinformation or fake news, whichever you care to speak of it, is going to be hugely problematic, and that's something the world has to be aware of. So that's a little bit about me and AML Intelligence.
Great, thanks for that, Stephen. I'll just pick up for our listeners or our viewers something you said there about first in the world with the criminal assets approach. And throughout our MBA in financial crime and compliance, never miss an opportunity to make a plug, we talk about this cycle where there's criminals, then there's regulators, law enforcement. They try and put things in place to try and stop criminals. But of course, the criminals don't fight by the same rules. They're much more flexible and they change. And the regulators, law enforcement, politicians are always in catch-up mode. So to actually have something which requires still proof, but less on the balance of probabilities, as I think you explained it, is a great step forward. Okay, thanks for that. Let's get into some parts of what we'd like to talk about. You talked about your own growing up in Kerry and opening up your international perspective with American tourists and things like that. And so it's useful to talk about, particularly in the context of what we're talking about, the European Union, anti-money laundering, the different spectrum of views that there are. And we talked in preparing for this session today, we talked about Italy and Germany, both of them significant countries with long traditions, major players in the EU, and yet not having a common view.
For sure, yeah. So Italy, in many ways has had to deal with organised crime from a very early stage. Yeah. So I guess even from the turn of the century, Italy was dealing with organised crime, with the various mafia type groups that it's had to deal with. And to some extent, before the Second World War, you could say that Italy, albeit through a totalitarian regime, had come to grips with organised crime. The invasion or the Allied invasion of Sicily, which threw out the Germans out of Sicily, but the Allies were abetted by the mafia from New York in getting into Italy, and in some ways that led to the surrender of Sicily quite quickly, but it re-embedded the mafia back into Sicily. And we've seen what has happened since then. The mafia has exploded in power, and has also embedded, getting into business. So the mafia has tried to legitimize its business for a long time. And you could say there's probably more business people in the mafia now than maybe, gangland types. And you can see the way the mafia has encroached into Rome and Milan and northern Italy. And that's, of course, using money laundering. But the Italian state was then also the first to embrace money laundering as a crime and introduce anti-money laundering regimes. And a bit like, other countries copied Ireland's model for an assets recovery bureau, most countries have now copied the Italian model of, following the money, follow where the money goes, the whole idea of money laundering legislation. So the Italians very much were the pioneers in this space. And then, I suppose, then, as you say, go a little bit further north to Germany. Germany has a very different outlook in many ways, really until quite recently. So after the Second World War, for different reasons, Germany didn't allow its police to gather intelligence because, during the Second World War, the Gestapo and other agencies of the state apparatus clearly used intelligence for malign purposes. And so Germany then was kind of gripping, how does it get a handle on financial crime and economic crime without the police gathering intelligence? So the model that came up recently enough was hand that over to the customs. And clearly that's not the answer either. But also Germany has wrestled with the idea, what is financial crime intelligence? And I have an interview on AML Intelligence this week with Daniel Telesclaff, the new head of the German FIU, who says, in German dialect, there is no word for financial crime intelligence. In fact, it's an Anglo-Saxon word. So there you have it, sort of, dare I say it, a little bit of a gap in the European approach to financial crime intelligence, where, German language-based countries like Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Austria, and Germany don't have a word for financial crime intelligence. And that's why their FIUs use the word FIU rather than a German word. So they actually call it the English word, FIU. Now, Germany has gone a long way down the road of embracing what financial crime intelligence is, and it was embedded into legislation just last year. So that was a huge cultural shift for Germany. And in fact, Germany now probably is coming out the traps a lot quicker than many other countries now, because it's setting up its own federal financial crime agency, the BBVA, and that will be something like 3,500 strong, and it'll embrace the FIU, the police, intelligence gathering, analysis. And so that's a kind of a really exciting model out of Germany. So I suppose that's a little bit of an example of two major European states coming at the financial crime problem from opposite ends of the spectrum in many ways.
Yes, indeed. And I noticed in the list of 9 nations who've applied, Germany has put Frankfurt forward as its candidate, I think, for the headquarters of the Anti-Money Laundering Authority. And of course, what you've just explained is a perfect example of the challenge of trying to adopt, shall we say, a global approach. You mentioned there, of course, the mafia, and fascinating, of course, to be reminded that it was the mafia from New York helping the Allies in, for their own purposes, of course. All these stakeholders have their own purposes. And throughout our MBA Financial Crime and Compliance, we talk about transnational organised criminal activities, and they are multinational enterprises. But again, they don't have to play by the same laws. So a huge dichotomy that we're trying to bring together, because all of these countries are playing in the global financial system, ecosystem. And one of the things the Financial Action Task Force claims to be doing is to protect the financial ecosystem globally from manipulation by anybody. Having talked about the different views within even a body like the EU, let alone all of the world. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the AMLA in terms of its expected geography? We might presume is solely within the European Union, but I think it may have wider reach, you say, and also the industry scope for the anti-money laundering. It isn't just banking, I don't think.
Sure. So I interviewed a European banking chief maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it was really interesting what he said. He posed a question to me, hypothetically, who is Europe's money laundering regulator, or who's most important in Europe for money laundering regulation? And I posited maybe the Danish Financial Regulator Authority, because they have done a lot in that space. And he says, no, it's America. He says, it's the United States of America is the money laundering regulator for Europe. And the case he said was all the money laundering fines, all the prosecutions against European banks are coming from the US Department of Treasury. So FinCEN, OFAC, all those guys are the guys that are fining European banks. So really, Europe found itself behind the curve. So you had the Baltics banking scandal, where 200 billion of Russian money was siphoned through Danske Bank in Latvia and elsewhere, and there were other scandals of the type where Russian money was funneled through European banks. And it was only through American vigilance and American prosecutions that this came to light, and that it was prosecuted. And you can see last year the Treasury Department fined Danske Bank €2 billion or dollars for its part in the scandal. So Europe saw this. The European Parliament was scandalized by it, and then you had the Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, Pandora Papers, and all those scandals that were revealed by journalists that showed the scale of the problem within Europe. So Europe really had to do something about it, and pushed on by the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the member states devised a European Anti-Money Laundering Authority, AMLA, should be set up to tackle money laundering in the bloc. And it's quite clearly a major problem. Europe is now the biggest consumer of cocaine in the world, surpassing the United States for the first time. Antwerp has become the gateway for cocaine into Europe. So you're seeing the criminalization of huge parts of Belgian industry and Belgian business, because the cartels are using Rotterdam and Antwerp and a major Spanish port as well to get their cocaine shipments into Europe. And that's having a toxic and corrosive effect on local politics and local business. And clearly something has to be done about it, and that's one of the jobs AMLA will have to tackle is, how is this money being put through the European financial system? And Maureen McGuinness, the European Financial Services Commissioner, says, dirty money is a clear and present danger to European politics and European business. So something has to be done about it. So that's why AMLA has come about. It's already a year behind schedule. 9 countries are competing to host AMLA in their countries. So 9 competing cities, and I suppose it's long overdue. We can't wait to see it up and running. It's already, as you indicated, it's gone from supervising banks to now supervising CASPs, or cryptocurrency asset service providers, VASPs, as the American call them gaming companies, football companies, luxury goods companies, and it's also going to play a role in enforcing sanctions. So it's a huge workload. Clearly, they're going to have to find somebody really strong to lead it. It'll need a really strong CEO, supported by a really strong team and a really strong culture. And they're going to have to seriously tackle the money laundering problem and the illicit assets problem, and dare I say, to some extent, the sanctions problem within Europe. So huge role for AMLA.
Yes, indeed. I hate to keep referring back to the MBA Financial Crime and Compliance, but it's one of the reasons we're having the webinar. And in about 5 years ago, I think it was, there was a schematic for how the European Union at that time went about deciding aspects of policy on anti-money laundering, and also who to sanction and things. And at the top of this schematic, it said, is this country already, has this country already been reviewed by the Financial Action Task Force, which in theory is a global body, but many people would say, and it is because it has regional geographic groups that actually carry out the investigations of members in that region, but many people would say, well, it's actually a tool for the US. We're not necessarily here to debate that, but it struck me that at that stage the European Union was very much saying, oh well, has the Financial Action Task Force looked at this country? Has the Financial Action Task Force put them on a grey or a blacklist? So implying that part of the task was already done. Is there a suggestion now that perhaps AMLA will have more teeth, or will be, I won't say more independent, because it was clearly independent, but will it have the resources to actually look at all these things, including adding in gaming, football, crypto assets, etc.?
Yeah, it's a huge task. I don't know any agency that's, that's still nascent, that has been given such a huge workload. And where will they find the right teams? Where will they find the crypto teams? Where will they find the gaming teams? Of course, it can be done, but from a standing start, it's a huge thing to do. And clearly also AMLA will want to make an impact early on. It will need to set lessons. It will need to start finding early on, finding banks, so that, it's seen to have a bark as well as a bite. Just like OFAC, just like FinCEN. So yeah, from going from a standing start to a running start, that's a huge thing for AMLA, and clearly then the leadership is going to be a huge part of that, as well as the people they choose as part of their team. And maybe the culture of the city where they go to as well will be important. But that's very much a secondary issue, I would say. And then as regards FATF, FATF, there's increasing criticism of FATF as just, being a box ticker, and maybe it needs to do more or less, or just maybe FATF needs to be a little bit more focused on smaller issues, but bigger issues from a global perspective. Maybe it's trying to do everything at once, and we can see the pace at which criminals are adapting. Like, criminals have adapted to crypto a lot quicker than the rest of the population. They've adapted to the internet a lot quicker than the rest of the population. They are far international. They're far more internationally focused than law enforcement. So it's a huge issue, and it's something AMLA and FATF are going to have to grasp with.
Yes, you mentioned in passing the bank who was handling Russian money and based in Latvia. Latvia is one of the 9. I doubt there'll be enough people in any of the 9 locations. It'll be, as probably with most European organisations, have people from lots of different member states. Would you put it in somewhere that has had problems? And to make a point, I think you're right that if they don't have a very rapid series of bites to prove they've got teeth, then people will go, wow, we don't have to worry about this. I was interested when you talked about culture, and you said just a couple of minutes ago the role of the CEO is going to be very important, and it is. We can talk a little bit about that in a moment, but one wonders, one might have thought it would be the organisation's culture, and many people might view bureaucracies of the EU, partly because it's got so many members that it has to consult and everything, as being slow and ponderous. Will that be able to deliver this authority that has bite and is able to very quickly demonstrate that it has teeth, do you think?
Sure, and I agree, that tends to be your view of European agencies, that they're slow, ponderous, over-bureaucratic, different levels of board supervision, which makes them less agile and less nimble. But I suppose if you take the example of the European Public Prosecutor's Office, it's probably only 2 years old. It's got off to a running start. It's dozens of prosecutions under its belt already. It's a feared organisation throughout the union. Laura, its chief prosecutor, is a powerhouse. Comes from Bulgaria, a country that has had a lot of issues with corruption, is now on the fat of grey list as it happens, but she has done a phenomenal job. So I suppose if AMLA gets the same start as the EPPO does, then it could be a phenomenal organisation. Where it's based doesn't really matter in my view, but its employees and staff members will be drawn from all over the union. And so, yeah, maybe from that point of view, the city has to be attractive to people who are not from the state where it's based. So yeah, that will play a part. And actually, I attended the AMLA hearings in Brussels 2 weeks ago, and that was a case a lot of the cities were making. You know, we're a very attractive city for foreign workers to come into. You know, we look after foreign workers. You know, nightlife is good. Pace of life is good, people enjoy quality of life, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that is one of the things that the various cities that are competing for AMLA are making a point about.
I'm sure, and of course, whilst we ourselves might say there must be a good nightlife, we want these bureaucrats putting the nose to the grindstone and getting on with the things. Who's going to fund this AMLA? Who's going to fund it, and how's it going to be funded?
Well, the Irish government, as happens, is offering 80 million to bring AMLA to Dublin, so that would cover the running costs for a while. I think Paris is offering 12 million, and other countries offering 10 million. But effectively, AMLA is going to is effectively going to be paid for by the European taxpayer. In as far as the banks are going to put a levy, the banks are going to pay a levy to fund to AMLA. Now, I know Wim Maij, I spoke with him on a conference quite recently. He's the president of the European Banking Federation. He said the European banks don't have a problem with that. They're quite happy to pay the levy that will in turn be used to pay for AMLA.
Yes, because of course I can imagine the vast majority want to be seen to be clean. When I referred in my introduction to financial services providers are also in many countries concerned when their own authorities are not strong enough, because it tarnishes the nation. And I'm very clean, so is my neighbour, so they want that organised as well. Is there anything you could tell us about, without obviously saying, and the answer is Dublin, about the 9 providers? I'll just go through them for everyone. There's Brussels in Belgium, Frankfurt I've mentioned, Dublin in Ireland, Madrid in Spain, Paris in France, Rome in Italy, Riga in Latvia, Vilnius in Lithuania, and Vienna in Austria. When's the decision to be made? The deadline for submission was 10th of November, I think, 2023. When will they announce across the post?
The European Parliament and European Council and the Commission, the so-called trilogue, are meeting again on February 22, so that's Thursday week in Brussels, and a decision is expected then. Now, that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if it's pushed out until March. It's the so-called Eurovision style of voting. So the 27 member states all get 1 vote each, so that's 27 votes, and the member states meet as the Council of the European Union, or the European Council, and then the Parliament also got 27 votes, which is divided up by political bloc. So the first 28 votes wins it, the so-called Eurovision vote.
All right. Yeah, we won't ask whether, as in the Eurovision Song Contest, because this is much more serious than that, whether or not parties, countries who have difficulty with others vote against them, null point, etc., etc. We won't go there. I've seen some.
It will be political horse trading, and it will be, people who curry favour with each other. For example, it's widely suspected that Germany has done a deal with Spain. Germany voted for the Spanish candidate to be the president of the European Investment Bank, and it's widely speculated that in return Spain will vote for Frankfurt to host AMLA. Now, that being said, Frankfurt is right now the clear and favoured destination for AMLA. Germany's putting a lot of firepower behind this. Christian Lindner, the finance minister, is putting a lot of his own personal collateral behind it. So I think a lot of people expect it's going to be Frankfurt. Now, at the AMLA hearings last week, a lot of the MEPs were saying, do we really want AMLO in the shadow of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt? Will the European Central Bank become kind of a big shadow over AMLA? And do we really want that? One MEP says, what about the growth of the far right in Germany? Is that not a problem for Germany? So all these issues have started to bubble up. Italy says, clearly we want it in Rome. Now, a lot of Italians would have said it should be in Milan, not Rome. But nonetheless, Rome came forward as the candidate for Italy. And the Italians were making the point that they have the Guardia di Finanza Academy in Rome, and that AMLA can learn a lot about serious organized crime fighting from the Guardia di Finanza, who are the AML authority for Rome. Vienna was putting forward, we have a great pace of life. Everybody wants to come to Vienna, and quite true, a beautiful city and great people. But a lot of the MEPs are saying we see you as being soft on Russia. You're soft on Russian sanctions, and one of the last European banks operating in Russia is Raiffeisen Bank, which is an Austrian bank. But one of the Austrian officials countered, saying, "Oh well, actually, the Americans don't mind us being Raiffeisen still being in Moscow because it gives them an idea what's happening in Moscow." So that was a different slant on it, maybe a very benign slant. Paris again is making great strides. Again, MEPs wonder, should AMLA be in the shadow of the European Banking Authority, which is already based in Paris? And some MEPs behind the scenes were saying, an agency that is based, an EU agency based in France, tends to become a French institution rather than a European institution. So a lot of people are unhappy with that. I don't think it's going to Brussels. Brussels doesn't stand a chance because it's already home to dozens of EU agencies. Plus, Brussels is politically a little bit unstable now with the Flemish becoming more right-wing, and the French and Dutch-speaking parts of Brussels at loggerheads. Who else? Latvia and Lithuania. It would be a big surprise. Dublin, Dublin, as well as putting up money, says, we are the bridge between UK and US and Europe. We have a common law system of law, which is of great confidence, UK and US, and we have a good history of law enforcement, as well as having one of the world's first uniformed police forces and national police forces. So those really are the arguments, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. We started out just talking about two countries, Italy and Germany, and the historical dimension. It certainly doesn't get any clearer now that we're in 2024. And yeah, Stephen, you're right, so many different perspectives.
My Spanish colleagues in Set Black and all that will be very furious with me for missing out on Madrid. And of course, Madrid, that connection with Latin America, really important, Spanish speaking, and a good history of fighting terrorism and chasing gangland criminals as well. So Madrid is clearly up there as well. So need to get out there. Get that out there.
Okay. No, we've recognised that you also clarified the position with Madrid. Just you talked about acting as a bridge. You said first of all Ireland to the US and the UK, and Madrid, Spain to Latin America. So clearly this is. It's for European Union nations, but it's the second biggest bloc in terms of trading and things. And there'll be Asian banks that want to be compliant and everything. And the final question I think at this stage I wanted to ask you was, somewhere I've read that there will be, or there have been, 40 financial institutions identified across the EU as being, we call them high risk, for want of a better phrase. And AMLA, when it's up and running, will have to have, because it's got to be fair, it's got to have one from each of the 28. Pity if you're a very small nation, you're not doing anything naughty, we've still got to find one from you somewhere. But I mean, 40 institutions doesn't seem like very many. And also you're adding in crypto and gaming and footballing, etc. This is huge.
Yeah, absolutely huge. So AMLA will directly supervise 40 institutions. Now, at one stage, MEPs were demanding that AMLA would directly supervise 5 institutions per country. So, you're talking what, in the hundreds there nearly. So it's going to be, so that was watered down a little bit, thankfully, because otherwise you would be giving AMLA a task that was unenforceable. So it will be one institution per country that will be directly supervised. So that's 27 institutions. And then AMLA will, the other 13 or so, am I right? Yeah, will be kind of the riskiest banks. So ones that are operating in at least three countries. You're talking about big institutions that AMLA will decide are riskiest. So they are the other 13 that will be directly supervised. And then, of course, every crypto asset transaction beyond 1,000 euros is going to have to be flagged to AMLA. Car sales, if you buy a car, Stephen, as you probably will, worth more than 150,000 euro, that would have to be flagged. Your car dealer will have to tell AMLA or the local competent authority how you got the money to spend that amount of money on a car. Similarly, private jets, how did you get the money to fund a private jet? Football clubs will be obliged entities as well. And cash transactions. Yes. Over 10,000 euros will be outlawed. Now, in many cases, in European countries, there is already a lower threshold of cash transactions. Then in other countries like Germany, Ireland, Sweden, Norway, I think, they don't have any upper limits at the moment. So that single rule book of a limit on cash transactions over, a ban on cash transactions over 10,000 euros will also be enforced.
Right. And just for those who are listening and watching and don't know me, when Stephen said he meant if one. I don't have a private jet, and the latest car that my wife and I have acquired to show that we are good Europeans is a Citroën Ami, and the purchase price of it is £8,000. So that's pretty low on anybody's threshold, but joking aside. Stephen, that's been fantastic in terms of presenting to us the challenge. And now let's have a look. Who's going to start us off with a question? Either open your microphone, or if you're more comfortable, type it in the chat and I'll relay it. €1,000 is not a big amount, Stephen, for crypto assets, is it?
No.
We could talk about so many institutions that they need to look at, and the role of technology. But at the end of the day, many people think technology isn't the be all and end all.
And the other one, Stephen, while you're looking at the questions there, the other big one for me is PEPs, politically exposed persons. So yes. Right now, a bank or any other obliged entity has to put a lot of vigilance into transactions involving PEPs. But under the new single rule book, siblings of PEPs are also going to be PEPs. So again, that is going to extend the workload of banks quite significantly, as in, if you're going to have to look at the sibling of every PEP, when you're doing a transaction. I'm on the board of a company myself, a state company, and I know when that state company tries to get loans, it's a long, prolonged process because, everybody on the board is a PEP, so the bank has to check each PEP. Now, if you're also going to have to check the siblings of each PEP, that's going to be tough. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. Now, when I spoke to the European Commission about this, they said, look, it's already in the FAT of recommendations that siblings of PEPs become PEPs. And also, in many other European countries already, it is the case. So they're saying it's not a big step.
Right, yeah. Of course, for those people who are perhaps not completely familiar with the idea of politically exposed persons, it's anyone who's got either authority or seeming to have authority or can manipulate situations that can result in inappropriate transactions or inappropriate policies and things that are adopted by central banks. Don't prosecute this person or whatever, they're a family member of mine, etc., etc. Okay, here we go. Oh, here's somebody. I also should have said I don't own a football club, but our first question comes in from somebody who's interested in football clubs. Let's see who it is, Katarina, and she says, my question is related to football clubs becoming obligated entities. Who exactly is within the scope? Players, agents, owners, sponsors, all of them, and what implementation time is expected for them? Do you follow football yourself, Stephen?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm a Spurs fan, and Irish football, or Gaelic football, and hurling and rugby are my passions as well.
So,
but yeah, as regards the question, yes. So the clubs themselves and the agents are coming under scope as obliged entities, and I suppose this has come from a lot of MEPs who think that money is being laundered through football clubs. You know, they're saying, look at the astronomical fees that are being paid. Look at the astronomical amounts that are involved. Look at the countries involved, and they're saying, is this not suspicious? So a lot of pressure coming from members of the European Parliament to bring football clubs into scope. So it's football clubs and the agents that are coming under scope, and they will be obliged entities in 3 years' time.
Right, just in passing, I was in Singapore before coming up here, and there's a senior minister who has been suspended for accepting tickets to football matches, concerts, each of them very small, literally a couple of $100 US in value, etc. That's not exactly the same thing we're talking about, but anything politically exposed person. And Tricia Nichols asks, as well as those who are currently politically exposed and their siblings, should former PEPs be treated with the same risk as current ones?
Good question.
Do you happen to know, is it? Are they going to?
I'm not quite, no, and I have to say I don't know, but it's a good question. And I would say probably, yeah, they should be, if they're not already. But and dare I say it, maybe a lot of obliged entities already treat them as PEPs for maybe, you know, a shoulder period between coming off a board or being a politician. But yeah, very good question, and one I'm not quite clear on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tricia. What was I going to say? Katerina, who asked about football. Are you connected to anybody who falls into any of those categories, Katerina? Players, agents, owners, sponsors? Are you an owner of a club yourself? I bet there's no response to that question. Oh, I wish. I suppose we all do. Not present in today's webcast, but some of my colleagues in Bangor University will know. A former colleague called Gareth was down in London and was walking along a street on the pavement. This very fancy car pulled up. These very large gentlemen got out, pushed him out of the way, and this figure was seen to walk between this like wall of very large bodyguards, and our colleague finally twigged it was Roman Abramovich. So that's a football connection there, isn't it? Any other questions that, or are you overwhelmed by the scope, indeed, or the opportunity? Just imagine if you could. Oh, here we are. Hi. Jerry Francis, hi, how are you? Not a question, a comment. I find it a bit ironic. There's a growing number of banks in the US and Europe taking the decision to terminate their correspondent relationships with banks in the Caribbean due to the high cost of regulatory compliance and the perception of government corruption, when the ones insisting on AML compliance are turning out to be the main offenders. A bit of a double standard, I say. I know that Jerry Francis is from the Caribbean, aren't you? Hence, and of course, many of those Caribbean nations, small island nations, yeah, from Antigua and Barbuda, of course, their costs per citizen are relatively high to maintain all these. Benjamin Bain says, what's your view of crypto's future from an AML financing of terrorism, etc. standpoint, do you consider the threats posed by crypto assets can be fairly mitigated given the blockchain analytic tools? Wow.
Yeah, so good question, and one that I don't think can be answered completely right now. It depends clearly in which direction crypto goes. You can see it's got a bit of a resurgence. You can see also the United States is a bit late, but nonetheless done it. The massive fine it placed on Binance and the Binance CEO, CZ, that's been a transformative investigation. And I think, Binance is now seriously taking compliance on board. Far too late, by the way. Should have been done years and years ago. And you can see similar fines for other crypto assets providers. So the game has changed a bit. Crypto is cleaning up its act, but still in all, it's still the favorite tool of criminals and malware gangs. That being said, the blockchain allows investigators identify quite quickly where the assets have gone, albeit, it's like any other international criminal investigation. It could be gone to North Korea, it could be gone to Iran, it could be gone to another country where law enforcement is not a priority. So your problem is, how do you get asset recovery? So yeah, blockchain is brilliant in identifying where the assets have gone, but can you recover them and can you trace them afterwards? But yeah, clearly the questions around crypto still not known.
Yes, and I think one of the I was reading recently, one of the reasons why crypto is so popular with criminals is it's so quick, it's global, and things get there. But as you say, then you have the problem of trying to recover it from malevolent jurisdictions and actors who are not going to bother with it. They're just not bothered in terms of trying to be part of the global financial ecosystem that I mentioned earlier. One last call for questions. You can always post them to us later if they occur to you, and we'll forward them on and get Stephen's view on those. I noticed that who was it who actually asked the question to the Stephens? Hi Stephens, which was the two of us, of course, and a few years ago here in Wales there was a television programme called Die Franks, the Two Franks. Maybe we should start a new one, Stephen, the Two Stephens. Okay, as I pull things towards a close, and I have a couple of slides to share with those of you who are not yet fully familiar with everything we do in the business schools exec ed. Do you think we could come to a conclusion, Stephen? Do we believe that nations, jurisdictions have sufficient resources, even if they have good intent, that they can be left to police these things themselves? This EU AMLA authority is going to be huge in terms of its resources, its reach across industries, etc. Is it either or? Nations on their own, global regulators, is there synergy between the two?
Well, I think, clearly the criminals are transnational. Clearly the criminals are international. The only way of tackling them is by being international as well. The only problem is police forces and FIUs are under-resourced and not funded well enough. So I think, you're going to have to see a sea change in how policing is done. So Robert Peel created the modern police force in the UK all those decades ago, centuries ago, and it became the model for the rest of the world. Somebody's going to have to create the new model of policing, and it's going to have financial crime and economic crime at its very heart. It's going to have to be international in outlook. It's going to have to embrace crypto. It's also to embrace, the metaverse and so on and so forth. But it's going to have to be very different to what policing is now, if it's going to be effective. Otherwise, you're only scratching the surface. And you saw the most recent surveys showing that there's $3 trillion in illicit assets flowing through the financial system every year. How are we going to tackle that if nothing changes? Everything has to change. Outlook has to change, political will has to change, and the policing model and the banking model has to change to take it on board. Otherwise, things aren't going to change. and policing efforts are going to be ineffective. And you can have FATF and you can have AMLA and everything else, but we'll only be scratching the surface.
Absolutely, and your reference to Robert Peel and the Peelers, as I think they were first called, draws my attention to a phrase attributed to all sorts of people, but it goes something like, those who don't study the lessons of history and learn from them are probably doomed to repeat the mistakes. And the final quotation, again, I probably misquote it, but I think it's Einstein who said, if we keep doing things the same old way, why will we ever reasonably expect that there'll be any different outcome? It'll just be the same. And as Stephen has led us through in these very interesting and entertaining 45 minutes or so, history has a role to play. We recognise where Italy, Germany came from and other nations, but the game is changing so very fast. And I touched in passing just a few minutes ago as we were talking about the role for technology. Stephen's brought it quite nicely back to say, financial intelligence units, law enforcement, indeed banks and their compliance functions are effectively all under-resourced. And people say, well, technology will be great, particularly if we're just going to look at assets of 1,000 euros or dollars, where you can sift through millions of these. Yeah, but some of those may be false positives, and all it does is the technology reports it upstairs to another organisation that hasn't got enough resources. They have a look at it. What do? And eventually it clogs things up, and there will be some unfortunate customers potentially who are caught unfairly in that trap. It's going to have to be a new model, as you say, Stephen. Go ahead.
And you're seeing FIUs swamped with information, high quantity and low quality. So that has to change. Dare I say that we're going to discuss a lot of this in Dublin on May 16 at the European Anti-Financial Crime Summit, which is getting together the top leaders in law enforcement and financial crime compliance in banking and fintech and gaming, as well as regulators and policy. And actually, one of the people joining us is Jim Lee, the Chief of Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigations. He's in charge of 3,000 special agents, probably the most powerful federal agency in the US. And he was one of the guys that went after Binance and its CEO, CZ. So he'll be really interesting on one of those earlier questions about crypto. And then that's May 16, but on March 5 next, we're holding the Women in Fin Crime Summit on AML Intelligence. So we get together the top women in financial crime for a conversation about an area and a sector that has actually 60% of the teams and workforces are women. So it's a number of organizations to see what's going on in that network.
That's great, because we see these webcasts not as just us promoting what we're doing. It's a global challenge, and the more different perspectives, which is why we have this series of Meet the Financial Intelligence Specialist from a number of different perspectives. So remember those dates: March the 5th, women in financial crime and AML. May the 16th, the Anti-Financial Crime Summit. So, and
I know Bangor's going to be there, so we look forward to seeing you guys in Dublin.
Yeah, indeed. Then I think just in the last couple of minutes on the screen, for those of you who are not yet familiar with our products, there are the two of them, globally unique. The Chartered Banker MBA that was created in 2009-10 after the global financial crisis, with the idea of reprofessionalizing, not saying that financial services and banking haven't been professional, it had just got very confused and a bit mixed up. The only one in the world still today that has a dual award MBA from a traditional university. Bangor University was the first in the UK to introduce a degree in banking in 1968. And before you all say, was I teaching then? The answer is no, I wasn't. Then this chartered banker status from CBI, one of the preeminent banking institutions in the world. Then in 2022, financial crime and compliance, with the emphasis on compliance. Some of my colleagues refer to it as the Financial Crime MBA, and I say, whoa, no, it's and compliance. We're not teaching people to be criminals. The criminal fraternity already know how to do that very well. It's about compliance. And the thing at the bottom, it says, all of our programs, if you don't feel, oh, I don't know if I can fit in. They're all aimed at busy working practitioners who have to balance work, study, family, social commitments. So if you want to try a single module of study to see how it works, we encourage you to complete the assessment so you earn credits towards going on to the full program. There are a variety of routes of advanced standing, flexible payment packages. When we celebrated the 10th anniversary, Tricia Nicholas totally recommend the FCC MBA. That's an unsponsored endorsement there from Tricia. Thanks for that. One of the statements is, if you think the price of education is expensive, think about the cost of ignorance. We've got all sorts of flexible packages. When we celebrated the 10th anniversary a couple of years ago of the CBMBA, we had one program, 10 years, 100 countries, 1,000 students. Not many students from one or two of those countries, obviously, but it's a global program. Come on board, get involved, and there's a slide finally that tells you where to find out more information. Slide 2, there we are. Next intake, April. We get into the full up and running of it in the end of April, early May. There's contact information for you. You can go on the website there, bangor.ac.uk/executive education. We also offer short courses tailored to corporate requirements. We've done some interesting stuff on agility, leadership in banks from countries coming into should we say, the competitive arena. Stephen, it's been great talking to you. Looking forward to seeing you in Dublin there. And thanks everyone for joining us. And yeah, there's Lisa, my colleague, who's the program manager, saying see you in Dublin on the 16th of May. Thanks again, Stephen. Amen. Really interesting.
All the best.
All the best.
Likewise.
Cheers now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.